The University of Oklahoma Gibbs College of Architecture is honored to bring to you this morning the artistic collaboration of Petra Bachmaier and Galero as the Fall 2020 Bruce Goff Chairs of Creative Architecture. As a Chicago-based studio, Luftwerk explores light, color, and perception in immersive, experience-based installations. Focused on the context of site, Luftwerk applies their own interpretive layer, integrating the physical structure, historical context, and embedded information into each piece. Since its founding in 2007, Luftwerk has assembled a significant body of work ranging from site-specific installations to experiential projects that interpret data. In each project, they are interested in the abilities of how light and color can be utilized to shift perception and enhance experience. Please join me in a warm virtual welcome, Petra Bachmaier and Galero.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you very much for having us give a presentation today. And we're gonna switch into our screen share now and kick it off.
I think we should talk a little bit about the studio first. And we've been around founded in 2007. And we actually met at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago here. And we started in the performance art department, but then worked our way towards installation-based art, and then projection, and then interventions within architecture. And so this is the presentation where we'll give is a sort of a 10-year span where we actually started with architecture, and Frank Lloyd Wright sort of kicked us off into that realm. So I guess we will start the slideshow.
And as Sean mentioned, when we initially started Luftwerk as a collaborative journey, we embraced video work and interventions in light installations using projections with materials. And in 2010, we received an inquiry from the Frank Lloyd Wright Preservation here in Chicago to engage with the Roby House for its centennial celebration. At that moment, we actually honestly did not know that the Roby House is located in Chicago. And the curator who asked us also didn't know we were located in Chicago as well. So it was kind of a match that launched a trajectory of us exploring architecture. Projecting modern, in that sense, was a milestone in our artistic career. And we really were diving into the archive and the philosophy of Frank Lloyd Wright. And how can you not fall in love with the philosophy of Wright and his ideas of organic architecture?
So here you see it's a drawer. Those are embedded drawers within the master bedroom of the Roby House. And we backlit these quotes from Frank Lloyd Wright. And we had a series of 3 of those, and there were pretty prominent quotes that really engaged our thought, our artistic process, and our artistic thought as well. So it really gave us a really better understanding of his philosophy.
When Frank Lloyd Wright talks about cantilevered roofs, he compares them to trees in nature, and trees offer shelter. So we kind of took it very literal of like projecting imagery of leaves in the wind onto the cantilever of the Roby House. Frank Lloyd Wright creates a drama with his architecture. It's about compression and expansion. So as you walk through his spaces, you always feel like going through something narrow and then it opens up. So it's kind of always like a theatrical entrance to exploring space. And here you see a hallway that is very narrow, and as you look up, you see an angled roof line, which became a canvas for video projections.
So we played with the geometry of the multiple planes of the ceiling, and sort of it, but also incorporating compression and decompression, expansion, and drawing the line and sort of animating it so that it would breathe and close and open.
We illuminated, we were using light sources that were casting shadows into a private bedroom. And those shadows are obviously one of the signatures of Frank Lloyd Wright architecture and his stained glass windows. So we wanted to kind of highlight how the windows kind of illuminate the interior space.
We also highlighted put a light in within the fireplace, the hearth. There was a nice closet that had a safe close to that side door that you see. And we found original recordings from Frank Lloyd Wright that we then played through a portable speaker system. Here's more of the sort of the shadows mixing in with the projections that we had outside. So this was a mixture of using light elements, spotlights, and video projection.
Here's an image of an additional bedroom in the private quarter of the Ruby House. And Frank Lloyd Wright, when he uses stained glass windows, he refers glass as a material to reflections in nature, reflections on water. So we wanted to take this idea of reflections on water and illuminate a bedroom wall with this motif. And the projections were living in relationship to his windows.
So there are two mirrored walls that we projected upon, and we filmed all the material within, a stone's throw distance from the Roby House. So a lot of it is culled from sight. And I think that was a very important philosophy from Frank Lloyd Wright to, use material close to the structure, close or within the region. And so you have this almost seemingly environmental piece with his architecture. So we built upon reflection and movement upon movement.
After projecting modern, we actually felt truly inspired by how our work can live in relationship or in dialogue with architectural spaces. And especially with Frank Lloyd Wright, we found a deep kinship and really enjoyed how he thinks of space and what we can learn from his architecture actually. And soon after, we were approached by the director of Falling Water and invited to create a site-specific piece for the 75th anniversary of the building.
So this image is sort of how we saw the house first from that overlook vantage point. And it's in the middle of winter, so the trees are barren, and you have this amazing view of the house. And so you can take in almost the linearity, the cantilever geometry. So this was our first intro to Falling Water. And then subsequently, we're coming back to do various tests. Everything had grown in, and it was this lush greenery around it. And going to the house, it was a wonderful journey where, you take a path, and then the house sort of surprises you as you come upon it. And it's at the same point very bold, but at the same point it's embedded within the environment that gives it such a harmonious nature.
And here you see we usually build models of the spaces we engage with. So we built a Falling Water model to test video projection and explore how the video can travel through the different cantilevers. And based on our model, we then translated it onto the actual architecture and video mapped falling water.
So this is sort of pixel mapping in progress to line up all the lines and make sure that the video is one seamless array of imagery. And so it takes quite a few nights to get in order, and it's a truly complicated building because you have different planes and different distances, and you have to focus on one cantilever surface while sort of balancing the others.
And the team at Falling Water had the ingenious idea of using hunting stands, tree mounting solutions for suspending the equipment or for mounting the equipment, which was phenomenal. But it was also really challenging to lift the projectors up, partially at like
25, 30 feet.
And when we planned in the studio, we had a topographic map of the architecture, and we knew where the trees were located, but sometimes we would not accommodate that the trees are not growing straight, they're actually growing at an angle, which sometimes, like once you kind of come from your drawing and you implement it in real space, there are always really kind of surprising facts that you did not accommodate for, and then you have to be flexible. And you know, with projection mapping, like throw distances play a big matter, they play a big role, so you have to accommodate on site.
Yeah, so we spent the whole summer within the studio with our video technician, Leeview, who you see there dangling off one of the stands. And we had this model, and we projected the whole summer, really calculating distances and sort of how the optimal viewing point and the optimal mounting places. And you come on site and really nature supersedes all your best planning, and you have to really adapt and be flexible there. But the crew at Falling Water was pretty amazing, and they really helped us sort of overcome these challenges. So the wonderful thing about this art in nature was that it started right at dusk. So you had still view of the house and the projection and nature. And so it was this wonderful balance of all these light and shadow and the facade surfaces. And so as the evening progressed, the house would disappear. And there were moments in the video where it would be just like a split second of darkness. And so you would be surrounded in nature, in darkness at Falling Water. And then the video would come to life. So we also filmed the water actually there and projected it onto the facades, the cantilever facades.
We created a video composition that uses the inspiration of nature that informed the architecture, obviously the waterfall, Bear Gulch, its situation within the trees and the forestry. And we also wanted to focus on the geometry that is used within the architecture. So within those three elements, this would be the grand finale of the actual presentation. It's the celebratory 75th moment.
So this was the fireworks moment that the then director sort of hinted upon. And the music is composed by a local musician and group called Third Coast Percussion, Owen Clayton Condon, and since then we've worked collaboratively with his compositions.
It was fast. This project was in 2011, and it really became very impressive for us to see how contemporary art, video projection actually creates a new experience with modern architecture and kind of allows you to revisit places that are of relevance, and this launched the trajectory of us exploring modernist buildings and modernist architects. From Falling Water, we were really impressed by the Farnsworth House, where we will talk more in a minute. But between Chicago and the Farnsworth House is the Bruce Goff House and the Ford House, which became a really fun place for us to explore and to work with. Exploring his materiality was really emboldening, and his creative spirit is really so joyful to experience and to explore that it was a real treat to work on lyrical geometry for the Ford House.
So here is an exterior shot of the Ford House, and you can see the material, you know, this influential material that, you know, Goff himself, when he was in the military, the Navy, you have this sort of rope motif happening. And to connect it all, the music that we played earlier at Falling Water, he's a board member of that musical group, but Sidney Robinson, the actual steward and owner of this house. And he also taught at Taliesin North up in Spring Green. So this is his residence, and he's been there, I think he's like the second or third owner of the residence. And it's just a very wonderfully odd house in this suburb outside of Chicago called Aurora.
And as a fun fact, after learning so much about Frank Lloyd Wright, we engaged in a journey that explored Mies van der Rohe. And Mies van der Rohe took his students on the way to the Farnsworth House, to the Goff House, and says, to the Ford House, never build anything like it. So for him, this was an absolute no, don't do architecture like this. Yet we found it a huge relief. We find his architecture extremely playful, innovative, bold. The space that it creates is very harmonious, and it's a very eclectic combination of all sorts of materials that is kind of boldly inspiring, of things he wouldn't have put together in his architecture in the most innovative, beautiful way, and with a high level of craftsmanship.
So you could see the sort of the architectural elements here, and those were really inspired by his time in the military, this bivouac idea of the arches, but creating it in the round. And there's materials such as the glass slag and coal and rope and these wood slats. So it's a real wonderful combination of the organic. And what the amazing thing about the house is that it's a whispering house as well. So you could actually stand on, or sit in the kitchen or stand above on the platform, and the sound would travel within that house, which was pretty amazing. And so we had, one night there was a concert, again with Third Coast Percussion, that we were part of the visuals for.
And we learned, So what you just saw is a player piano roll by Bruce Goff. So one of the nice facts about Bruce Goff is that he actually was also creating music and player piano music. And we thought we really liked the visual and kind of the composition that you see within those piano rolls, and used those as a springboard of creating an intervention specific to the house.
So he would punch out these player piano rolls by hand and sort of create, I guess, based pretty much on the visualness of that. And so that was a source of inspiration for us as well.
And we illuminated the interior ceiling with inspired by the player piano, and it became almost like a starry universe. And also as if the building transformed into a giant scroll. We video mapped the slats, the geometry of the ceiling, and animated the space.
So during this night, Third Coast Percussion also played. So it was this wonderful synergy of visual projection and the audio projection. And it was, they also were inspired by the Bruce Goff music, player piano rolls. So they created original compositions based on that. And in between, there were vignettes of just the player piano music. So it was a wonderful mix of sort of contemporary and this historical music from Goff.
We also imagined the house as a canopy. So it became like a wooden, kind of like canopy foliage shelter, like the interior of like a tree house. So we played with those three themes, like transforming the house into a tree house, into animating its architectural presence with the wooden slats that are really finely made. It's really beautifully crafted, and using the ceiling as a scroll for the player piano visuals.
I think within our practice, that's sort of the narrative, is to really engage the organic, natural elements, but with geometry and sort of the man-made architectural elements as well, and sort of create this harmonious bridge. And within that transition, you have, a wonderful display of colors and sort of playing on geometry and nature. So also Sydney has quite a plant collection in this house as well. And there's this one facade of windows where it's plants, and they actually grow, the dirt is actually from the outside. So there is no separation from, there's that one part where there's no separation from outside and inside. And so the roots are growing from the outside to the inside. So it's a wonderful play of organic and nature.
Here you see Sidney Robinson in a really nicely patterned shirt. He is an incredible architectural historian and steward of the house. So I think he just recently applied for landmark status. And his background is architecture and being an architect and teaching architecture in Taliesin, as Sean mentioned. So he was really a wonderful companion on our journey throughout years, actually, and explaining and exploring different spaces and introducing us to architectural ideas.
So, and he also has these wonderful stories where, you know, architecture students would come out and not visit him, but visit the house. And so he would see these students peering in, and he had wonderful interactions where he would invite them into the house and, you know, show them the interior. And so he's a really strident, you know, preservationist, but also steward of this amazing American architecture.
And now we are jumping into Mies van der Rohe full on. The project titled Insight was actually a very long journey for us. Soon after Falling Water in 2011, we were looking for an architectural site that was of similar significance than Falling Water. And that site for us was obviously Farnsworth House, since the Farnsworth House is equally creating a relationship between man-made structure and nature. We wanted to learn from Mies van der Rohe how his particular building nestles within the site. And that journey that started in 2011 with a very innocent email to the director of the house, Whitney French at that time, and her response was immediately overwhelming. Within like 5 minutes, she's like, when do you come and do a site visit, and let's test how this can work for the Farnsworth. And from there on, it became a 3-year-long journey of negotiating how to engage with an iconic structure that is owned by the National Trust of Historic Preservation. And in 2014, we finally were able to open Insight. It was a 3-night intervention, and it took on the same topics as for Falling Water, which was reflecting on the site. At the Farnsworth House, there is the Fox River. There is the sighting of trees that was really prominent for how the building was situated. And the geometry, which is really stark. You have glass. And when you think about glass, you think it's impossible to use projections with glass surfaces. But actually what happened with the Farnsworth House is that the ceiling, the light traveled through the glass and illuminated the ceiling space. So the space felt actually elevated, and it became like the vacuum got amplified. And within the building, the reflections casted on the windows into an infinite kind of space. So it felt like the space internally expanded significantly.
So we also, as Petra said, we touched upon the themes of pretty much what we did with Falling Water and Lyrical geometry, which is geometry in nature. The organic meets sort of the man-made. And so we had lines and color, geometric patterns really following the channels of the house, the vertical and horizontal, but also dealing with the site at hand, which was the Fox River, and this wonderful tree. It was a black sugar maple that was, you know, the witness tree to that location. And unfortunately, that sort of fell a year earlier. So we used imagery from nature projected onto the building as well. And this is from across the river, the Fox River. There's a sort of a state park where one could also view the house. And, you know, there's stories where Edith would peer out and there would be, again, students possibly on rafts or on boats looking at her house and trying to get to, you know, the Farnsworth house.
So it's actually quite interesting because usually you would not visit the Farnsworth house in the evening. So the audience that came to see this project, it was a very unique experience in a way that you would not see the house at night. And it also kind of changes the museum. The house is only available for tours. So engaging with a building like this and seeing experiencing a site through interventions like this creates a new kind of connection. It also draws a younger audience to a historic landmark like the Farnsworth House. And we hope that projects like this actually increase stewardship and preservation efforts to keep those relevant structures in current contemporary dialogue.
Yeah, the Farnsworth House is it's located right at the Fox River, and that is continually, it's a floodplain, and so through seasons it gets flooded, and you know later on you will see projects where we actually map the flood lines. But I wanted to touch upon the music that we collaborated with, again with the composer Owen Clayton Condon, and he used 3 types of materials. He used glass, actual wine glasses, and had him sort of tuning them with his finger, metal through a glockenspiel, and marimba, wood. So he really culled from the site sort of the materials, but also the tone. So if you sit on that porch with the floor and the ceiling, there's a certain tone, and if you clap your hands, you could hear that tone. And so he riffed off of that tone of the house and gave it another voice.
actually last year we came back to the Farnsworth House. So between 2014 and 2019, there was a really, we have engaged with other projects obviously, but it was really exciting to come back to a place that we have been becoming so familiar with. And we created a project titled Geometry of Light. It is a two-part project that took place at the Farnsworth House, but actually launched in Barcelona, Spain, at the German pavilion, also designed by Mies van der Rohe. And the idea is we are using Bosch red laser level tools, 3-plane laser, that are typically used for construction sites to clearly measure the precision and the exact heights and levels of architecture. And these lasers we then programmed into a sequence to create a dynamic experience with the architecture in the site. And what you see right now are the flood lines, the horizontal lines that mark the facade of the building are based on historic floods the house has experienced. So you can see the water actually reached pretty high into the house at some point. Also here you see how high the water has reached historically. And this is causing, obviously, a huge issue for preservation. And there has been many discussions of how to preserve the architecture, including considering to remove it or installing a hydraulic system so the architecture, in case it floods, could be lifted off. A project like Geometry of Light does draw a very unique audience, and we hope through kind of highlighting the historic kind of markers of the site in relationship to the building, we kind of brought the topic into a different experience.
So with the previous projects, we were video mapping, and with this one, we're actually laser mapping. And it's really mapping the architecture, the layout of the stones, but also sort of the interior and, like you said, the historical data. So, but also mapping nature in a way. The previous project, Insight, was really about the house and projecting on the house and through the house and the ceiling. And with this project, Geometry of Light, it was really dealing with the site and the historical data of the Fox River, but also the trees that were on the site as well.
So just to briefly cap it off, what you saw was a very clear layout for lasers that followed the architecture, the 8 columns that the building is built upon, like the swelled steel columns. We used the structure as a guideline to placement of lasers, and the site, like we used 5 laser lines to highlight the historic data of floodlines, and we placed lasers where there were historic trees. So we kind of connected the placement of the relationship of the natural setting in relationship to the structure of the house. And that became the composition for geometry of light.
So there were also moments where, oops, let's go back here. There were moments where it was a darkness around the house and the only illumination came from these laser levels. And so we didn't recognize a single soul. So everyone was sort of this anonymous, red marked human being walking along the grounds. And so it gave it a sense that you were within this immersed experience. And these lasers projected 300 feet circular. So it cut through nature, grass, trees, leaves, and it was just an all-inclusive, immersive experience.
And the audio, the sound was composed by Oriol Tarragon, and he is a Spanish, Barcelona-based composer and musician. And he actually also, interestingly, created the soundtrack for Jurassic Park. So that's why you might have some deeper undertones within the journey of geometry of light. He collaborated with us for the first time in Barcelona, and at the second part of Geometry of Light, connecting the 2 architectures that are very distant from each other, but the ideas of the architecture in Barcelona really connects with the Farnsworth House, and we wanted to draw a connection through the red laser line.
And the Geometry of Light project between the Pavilion and the Farnsworth is actually a collaboration with Iker Gil of Mass Context, and you should really look into his studies and his critical thinking. He's also from Spain, but he also is an architect, and he was very fundamental in really discovering the historical context with the sites, both sites, and like connecting them, building a bridge. And so it was a full-on collaboration with Iker. So a very different environment in Barcelona, where the pavilion is on a plinth and it's somewhat in the middle of a city, in a very touristic part. So you have the urbanness of Barcelona with this contemplative environment of the pavilion. So we also illuminated the lines within the stonework, but also the channels.
And we used the wall. We created this idea of extending the wall, because the building has like freestanding walls that it's famous for. So the walls are just floating elements within the space. So we always imagined, what if the wall continues? So based on this idea of extending the wall, we placed lasers to kind of draw lines as if the wall extends. we followed the very precise, seemingly precise architecture of Mies van der Rohe. And it is very nice to know that a very perfectly, a space that feels so extremely perfect, like the pavilion, actually sometimes doesn't line up. So that even when you think the stonework is all in one line, it does not always match up, which is phenomenal when you're like, oh, but this house in itself is really super balanced and very harmonious.
Right, and sort of those columns take all the weight of the pavilion, the roof line. So within that, you see that there's a line that's misguided, but that's following the column line. So there was, you know, this idea of shifting lines, and, you know, one would think Mies is totally perfect and correct. And, you know, that could be a homage to his sort of decisiveness and like just not even skewing, but on purposeful intent to create a line that's offline.
One also has to say that the building is a reconstruction. The Barcelona pavilion only existed for several months. It was designed and built in 1929, and it was really only part of like a world exposition meant as a showcase of German architecture at the time. And this building became like the ghost of architecture of the 20th century. Architects were trying to understand what is this building about that makes it so special. It was a true modernist expression at a time. It was way ahead of its own time. And you can see here, this was the opening of in 1929. You would think, I mean, it's very impressive of how avant-garde Mies van der Rohe created space in 1929. And the Barcelona pavilion, the German pavilion, as it is a reconstruction, it allows for interventions by architects and artists like us, which is exciting because it really encourages the dialogue with the architecture and emboldens. Like if you look on their website and explore other interventions within the space, you will be really inspired to discover how many people have created unique site-specific responses to the site.
Yeah, and because it's a reproduction, a replica of the original, that they can afford that, they could really delve into the space, they can cover up the space, and they could really do these amazing interventions within it. So with the Farnsworth, it's a natural historic landmark. Here it's a replica, and so it's almost as if it's a living art exhibition.
And we continuously explore spaces that are of unique architectural relevance. And here you see the Netsch house. Walter Netsch was a principal at SOM, Skidmore, Owens & Merrill's, a very large-scale international architecture firm that has a headquarters in Chicago. And Walter Netsch has a very interesting philosophy of how to lay out and design space, and it's the field theory. So here you see his drawings based on field theory. It's always triangles and how they fit into a square. And that's how he lays out space.
So his house just was recently renovated, and when he lived there, he had art all over the place. He and his wife had art everywhere, and the new owners sort of want art, but they wanted a digital piece. And so we were commissioned to create such a thing. So you could see the interior where it's multiple planes and multiple angles, and it's a very sort of stark white environment with natural wood. But we really played upon sort of the concrete, the bricks, and the layout and the geometry, and created this custom video projection. It was a special commission that we projected on this wall and the ceiling above, the angled ceiling above. And so they could basically turn it on when it's dark enough and sort of turn it off when, you know, they need to. So it was this presence of art, but also living and sort of, you know, not necessarily permanent within there. So we mapped each of these sort of bricks pretty much perfectly and created this sort of living wall that sort of evolved and breathed, and there was some introduction to color, but also outlining the seams.
And we're jumping back in time. In 2012, we created Luminous Field, which was a response to Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate and activated AT&T Plaza with video projection. And as you cannot touch the cloud gates, we touched upon the floor and used the reflective quality of the sculpture. And what we did, we looked at mosaic floors, historic patterns on tile flooring, and translated them into a digital realm and created kind of like a hopscotch pattern where the public could interact and play with light. And for us, this was really phenomenal to see the power of public art. Over 10 nights, we had an audience of 65,000 visitors. It was a playground for people of all ages. Young and old came out. It was the middle of winter, and usually Millennium Park in winter can be empty, so it was a way of activating a public space and creating a place for people to come together.
So every night there were these, we worked with a performance group, local performance group, to activate the space as well, to invite the audience to participate. And this footage sort of is a little misleading. We actually opened up in a snowstorm. So the beam, which we call it in Chicago, and the plaza that it was on actually had a nice dusting of snow, and that sort of illuminated the projections. So here you see sort of the back end of it, the structures that are needed to project these things, and it takes quite a bit of formulation and calculation, distances, and sort of how to house the equipment and where to place the equipment. But also, you know, you need to get engineering approval to put these structures up. So there was a whole other back end of sort of, to create this seamless video field, you have to have all this technology and hardware behind it.
And actually in 3 weeks from now, we are installing a permanent light art sculpture within the Marcel Breuer Design Public Central Library in Atlanta. And we couldn't be more excited about this opportunity. There was a national call 2 years ago for artists and designers and architects to propose a site-specific piece that responds to the Marcel Breuer architecture. And we were fortunate for our piece to be selected. And we took a look, obviously, on the architecture. We were really smitten by the very iconic Breuer designed window quartet.
The skylights within the library. So it's going under renovation, and it should be done fairly soon. They had removed the elevator shaft and created this light well. And then within the light well, we'll be suspending our mirror sculpture with lighting. And based on this quartet, we created 2 quartets, upper and a lower quartet. And we call these sort of branches and leaves and stems and trunks. So we're really playing off of the idea of Atlanta as a city with within the canopy of trees. And so we also etched these words that were sourced from the community all around Atlanta and outskirts of Atlanta. And it's really about what do trees sort of symbolize for you or mean for you. And within the community gathering, we collected these words, and a local poet put it together to form a poem. And so within the top to bottom of the sculpture, you will read a poem.
Here you see the studio setup, obviously our mock-up to test how the mirror, like it's a setup of 200 stainless steel polished discs. And these discs are like the leaves that are engraved, and they follow the idea of like if you look at trees in history of how they have been symbolizing also knowledge, the tree of knowledge. So we wanted to create a tree of collective light, and also a tree of like that connects us as a community. And as Sean mentioned, the words were gathered through community workshops where we gave people of all walks of life in different areas in Atlanta 4 circles where they would inscribe their association with trees and what inspires them about trees. And these words are engraved into 200 of those discs. Those discs then are combined into a sculpture that kind of resembles the idea of a tree, and the sculpture is illuminated with color lighting.
So these spotlights will also then create this caustic environment of mimicking the dappling of sunlight through trees. And so also looking underneath a canopy, a tree canopy as well. So this is a digital rendering of sort of the installation, how it hopefully would look like. And that is, like Petra said, we will be installing that fairly soon. Right.
And
I think that is it for the presentation.
Thank you very much for such an engaging and inspiring presentation. So, your work is very, it's fascinating. We'd like to take this opportunity now to open it up for questions about your work. I'm sure many of you, especially the students, have some questions they would like to ask. So if you want to unmute your mic and we'll take questions.
I will start it off. Hello, my name is Campbell. I'm an interior design major. I want to say thank you for coming and taking the time to speak with us. How did you manipulate in the pavilion project, since it's more of a city location, taking the lighting of the outer areas away? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the Barcelona pavilion,
Yes.
it's kind of in a dark area already, so we didn't actually take away any lighting. We worked with the lighting, and there's one part of the pavilion where it's outdoors, where there's a reflecting pond, and that's where some urban lighting is located. But we really worked with the lighting, and the lasers are pretty powerful that they could, once it got darker, they can overcome the environmental lighting, the ambient lighting. So unfortunately, we didn't have control of the ambient lighting. So it was really placing the lasers in the optimal positions.
it was unlike at the Farnsworth House where there is no light pollution.
Yeah.
because it's so much in nature. So obviously the laser lines or the lighting element within a place that has no ambient, no light pollution is really powerful. And within an urban setting like the German pavilion, you always have city lights that kind of, you have to just embrace it. It was similar for luminous field, where you have like the overall lighting that is required for safety in all of our environments. So, you know, it's interesting. It's always a treat to work in a dark space, that's for sure, because all of a sudden, all you see is the light and everything else disappears.
Right. For Farnsworth, for Falling Water, we didn't need the brightest projectors because it's already in a dark environment. There's no street light. There's no environmental light. So we went with sort of mid-range projectors that had mid-brightness, and it worked perfect. But for like luminous field and Millennium Park, you need the brightest projectors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I'll go. So my name's Elizabeth, and my question is actually focused on the Luminous Field project at Millennium Park. So when you go to do a project like that, how do you even begin to calculate like how the light is going to bounce off something as abstract as the beam of Chicago?
We do tests, right? So usually we would go in and figure out, like on a project like that, we figure out what is the size of our projection area, what is technically possible. And then, you know, we also illuminated the underside of the beam so that the reflections would cast within the sculpture. And you cannot really calculate that. You can just play with it, honestly, and have tests.
Yeah,
like a lot of the projects we do require tests.
So we do a lot of site visits beforehand, 1 or 2, and for the Millennium Park, we had a cherry picker and a projector and our technician just aiming the video down on the ground and seeing how that worked out. And, you know, from there, you just increase the calculations to more coverage and more brightness. But it's really on-site testing, field calculations, getting things, you know, seeing things by your eye and seeing how they work and knowing what the challenges would be and sort of calculating those challenges.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we had a student email in a question. So it seems like most of your designs are drawn from a concept or inspiration. What is some advice you have for developing a strong concept when it comes to lighting?
It's so subjective. I mean, for us, it's been a really wonderful journey to explore architectural spaces through light. So learning from these architects of how they create space and, you know, learning from these interventions, we also create our own body of work. So what we showed you is a part of our portfolio that is fully embracing the ideas of the architects, and within those ideas we hope to identify our own voice within it, and which then informs our own artwork. So, you know, it's really how you feel, what inspires you. If you're interested in exterior spaces, urban spaces versus private interior space, like wherever you feel like your charm is calling you.
I think also research is so key for us to delve into research and materials, philosophy, site location. You can get a lot of inspiration from even the site and the history of the site.
Any other questions from students?
In regards to, sorry, my name is Krista Woods, and I'm a graduate student of interior design. So in regards to some of your historic preservation projects, are there any wish list projects that you would just really love to get your hands on?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think there's definitely one.
Yeah, we can't talk about it too far.
We could
There's
say
a-
it's in Berlin, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many places that are really incredible to engage with. So, you know, actually this year we were asked to engage with the Huntington Gardens in Pasadena, California, and to actually create a piece that is focused on landscape. Due to COVID, it has been canceled. So, you know, those are places we cherish a lot, where we feel like those are very meaningful places for society or communities at large. And creating an intervention within those public spaces is really beautiful. It draws in attention to the place. It kind of creates a new layer of experience of a place. And through every experience, you create a new way of connecting with a place, because like you create a memory and people cherish that memory, hopefully.
And I think with our projects, these are projects that you've seen, that we've shown you, but apart from that, we've been approached to also sort of connect the contemporary with the historical, with other buildings and other structures, and they have rich historical context and significance, but through, you know, red tape, they've been destroyed, unfortunately. So, you know, we've worked with the National Trust of Historic Preservation. So really creating contemporary art with the dialogue of history really keeps these buildings preserved. So
they need to stay relevant.
Yes.
And you know, I think it's very important for historic places to have contemporary interventions, because that's what really kind of, that's how we learn from history, or history teaches us or informs us. And you know, there are spaces that are very relevant. Here in Chicago, we have the Goff Park Conservatory. It's a large, at that time, 1906, it was the largest conservatory in the country. And we were asked to create an intervention with that space. And, you know, it's really phenomenal when you kind of know you draw in a new audience into a place. Besides the people who usually would go there, you create another layer of experience, another layer of a story that is already historic. So it's very enriching to activate places in a new way. So there's always more places.
I wonder if you could share with the students, we talked briefly before the session started, you know, we're in an era right now of COVID and social isolation. And you all mentioned about a project you're working on that the installation happened virtually. Can you share that with the students? Because I think it's important for them to understand that in times, you know, you have to be very creative in how you still maintain the professionalism and work goes on as usual.
Right. It was actually a blessing for us. We started working on a project for an exhibition titled Total Space. It opens this Friday to the public at the Museum für Gestaltung in Zurich. It's the Museum of Design. And the conversation started early this year, pre-COVID. So, and as the year progressed, the entire design process was obviously through numerous Zoom meetings and sharing all of our ideas, sketches, discourse with the curators, everything through online platforms. So even for the opening, we were honestly hoping that by October we would be able to travel again. But so it happens that also the opening moment will be through Zoom. So it's a very interesting experience to know that there is a drawing that you create in your own space. And
an installation, you know, an installation that deals with painting and lighting.
And space, actual space.
So right before this webinar, we just got off a call with them about the lighting. And that is so difficult to see lighting, you know, via Zoom. How do you correct the lighting? How do you program the lighting? But I think, you know, we're sort of, it's a big challenge, but you know, one has to overcome it. And I guess we were very successful in, you know, programming the lighting. So it does give it a different skew to things, and it's hard when a lot of our work is experiential based. So you need to be there, we need to be there. So it's sort of this, it shifts the process differently of how you create mentally and physically.
But it's possible.
Yeah, it is possible. It looks very good.
It's been interesting to kind of like think about like how this virtual engagement will impact work that is so experiential, like a real space cannot be a virtual experience, or, you know, the two don't connect that well. But at the same time, you feel like, you know, you keep creating, and it's also for a time when people will, I mean, spaces like the exhibition we open in Switzerland, it will be open for a limited audience number. So you are able to visit these places in a safe way. So, you know, it is possible. So we feel grateful that our medium at this moment can still translate and be experienced.
Any other questions from students or guests?
I have one.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, my name is Rick Skaggs. I'm on the faculty here in interiors. With all the data and the mapping you've been doing on these structures, these historic structures, have you ever considered taking that and superimposing it in a different space?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially with the geometry of light. I think Mies, you could do a footprint and transplant it, translocate it somewhere else. And we thought about doing those things, and I think it's a very, very interesting aspect of, you know, superimposing our plans onto another plan, you know, layering it, getting the complexities, or lining it up or not lining up. So it's definitely within the brainwaves.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, anybody else? The previously asked question by a student, with the advances of technology, where do you see your work going in the future?
Well, hopefully it stays experiential. So, you know, a lot of artists and creators are leaning towards augmented reality, virtual reality, and creating work within those realms. But we feel like we still remain in the actual experience. We are too fond of materiality and the physical experience, and using technology more as a tool rather than creating work that is purely technology based.
I think the latest technology equipment we bought is an airbrush. So we want to delve into, you know, handcrafted paintings, pigments, you know, look for how that reflects in color, how that interacts with color lighting. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at color and haze and complementary colors, and, you know, how do we paint that? How do we create that? So
yeah, we love analog ways of doing things.
Yeah, don't discount analog technology. It's, you know, we also are working in neon. So neon is it's a beautiful analog light. And I mean, it's still electrified, but the gaseous element is just, it's amazing, the glow and the way you can form things. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you almost can't get the same effects from any LEDs. You know, if you look for beautiful light qualities and sculpting with light, neon is a wonderful medium. And, you know, even you think like, oh, it might have been outdated, but it's actually having a comeback. It's a very beautiful medium of how it casts light on walls and how it creates an ambience. And, you know, even though technology evolves and we hardly can keep up with the amounts of light bulbs that are on the market, and how hard it is to find the the right bulb for the project that you need, like what we showed you for Atlanta, finding the perfect light bulb to illuminate mirror is it can be a rabbit hole. You go through several iterations of bulbs until you find one that works. So, you know, searching for the parts that you need can be a real journey. So.
All right, any other questions that you are burning to ask? Anybody? Okay. Well, thank you again, Petra and Sean, for taking time out of your day. And I know it's been a busy week with the installation and everything for you, but being able to meet with us and provide, you know, an example of how lighting can be looked at through another lens, the artistic lens. And, you know, so I think hopefully the students will be able to take this information away, and as they start to approach other lighting projects within their own sphere, that they can incorporate the artistic element of play and experiential component as well to that. So again, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
You.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Thank you. It's been a real honor. We love Bruce Goffs. So thank you for reaching out to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.